Welcome to the Energetically You podcast, where we will be talking about healthy habits, abundant mindset, and optimal wellness. I'm your host, Megan Swan, creator of the Sustainable Integrated Wellness Approach. At 30, I sold everything and went on my own eat, pray, love journey, if you will. And now, at 41, I'm still on my first stop here in Mexico, loving life and feeling more energy than ever before. This podcast is for ambitious women who are looking to level up their energy so that they feel happier and more productive throughout their day in all of their projects and passions. Inside, we are going to be talking about ways to truly tune in to our minds and bodies in new ways to leverage our natural energy sources. So let's dive in. I am so excited for this interview. Amy Solara is a incredible being. She is so diverse, and I've been following her and loving the energy and the information that she's putting out with the world. Briefly go over her bio with you. She is a certified Vinyasa and Buti yoga instructor, a mother, a witch, and a priestess. She has been trained in the esoteric arts and the occult by master teachers from all over the world. As a tarot reader, spiritual mentor, and life coach, she offers her clients a holistically soulful approach that is both grounded and connected. Her greatest passion is aiding humans in rediscovering their inner divine through holding ceremonies and workshops that utilize movement, meditation, and magic. Amy is on a personal journey of balancing motherhood with all of the other passions in her life, and especially enjoys helping women find their way on similar paths. She welcomes the simple moments with her children as the perfect teaching space for finding gratitude, presence, and patience. Welcome, Amy. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So just very quickly, you are a yogi, a Buti yoga instructor. I want to dive into that too, because I'm not even sure I know what type of yoga that is per se. A mother, a witch, and a priestess. Can you unravel some of those terms a little bit for us and give us the breakdown of how long have you been embodying those titles and what that means to you?
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of putting it, embodying the titles, because I feel like so much of the work I do is embodiment practice on how we bring the spiritual back into the physical, because I think a lot of times people want to escape the tangible reality and kind of spiritually bypass and get up into these upper realms. And that's wonderful to want to connect to your divine essence. It's wonderful to want to connect to God. But if you're ignoring your life in order to do so, I don't think that's wonderful. So part of the reason I embrace the title of witch is it's about being present on this planet and being connected to everything that's on this planet as much as it is to the cosmos. And it's about working with reality. So the etymology of the word witch is a highly argued point these days because, as you said before we started, it's getting more widely used, and I always like to
thrown around, right?
It's trendy to be a witch nowadays, and it cracks me up because when I first came out of the broom closet, so to speak, with my family. They were very, very terrified. They were concerned for the well-being of my human body as much as my Christian soul at the time. And so there's a lot of flashback, and the type of witchcraft I was practicing then was called reclaiming, and the word witch was a huge component to it. We were reclaiming the power, reclaiming the essence, and so I love to get into the etymology of it because the history of the word witch comes from either to know, like to wit, right? Or to bend and shape, which is wick. and bending and shaping reality. And then wick also has other connotations. If you look at certain parts of the British Isles, it means something that's alive. You're like, oh, it's wick. And so that word itself holds so much magic just by itself. It's to know or to shape or to bend or to be alive. And I love that. And I love that my spiritual practice is based off of knowledge and wisdom and holding that and being a wisdom keeper as much as it is to bend and shape reality and be a co-creator of the world I'm experiencing and to be fully alive and present within my body.
Wow, I love all that. I love how you unpack that. Can we go back to a term that you use, the spiritual bypassing, and dive a little bit into that? Because I will admit that maybe 6 or 8 months ago, I had to Google it because I felt like I'd seen it used a lot and I still wasn't clear on what exactly that means. And do you think it's misunderstood?
I do think a lot of people hear it and they don't know what it's really being used in order to convey. There's like spiritual bypassing and shadow work get thrown around a lot, and they're really deeply connected. A lot of times when people say, be careful you don't spiritually bypass here, there are certain spiritual practices that bring you into bliss and into ecstasy, and it can become addictive. It can become something that is almost like a crutch, where instead of dealing with past patterns, dealing with trauma that might still be present in the body, dealing with relationships that are no longer healthy, people just kind of own their way out of it. Yeah. they meditate for so long that they aren't living. And so they're literally spiritually bypassing the issues, and they're not practicing shadow work. They're not sitting in the discomfort, which is why they're doing it, because it feels good to do the breath work. It feels good to do meditation, and they're not addressing the consistent issues that are coming up, which are leading them into this path of moving around it rather than through it.
That is what I came to understand after my brief research, but there was still like some controversy. I don't even remember what it was going on that it wasn't clear to me how that term applied to the controversy. Anyway, can you tell us a little bit more about being a priestess and what that means to you?
Yeah, so it's funny, I just got a tattoo on the back of my neck that enhances that. There have been, for eons, humans who are intentionally living a path of practices during the day, of the way that they speak, of the energy they work with, that helps channel the divine into the world. And some people do it very intentionally, and some people do it very unintentionally. And I like to live on purpose. I like to be here and be present and make my life a ceremony. And priestesses were either the voice of the gods for the ancients, or they were the stewards of the gods for the ancients. And I like to embrace both aspects of that title without diminishing the divine in others. So this is something I do every yoga class when I say namaste, I bow to the divine in you. And I like to remind people that they also can live a path of priestesshood. They also can live a life as ceremony. And every time you wake up and you think of a prayer to the sun, or every time you light some incense, or you step into conversation with someone, you can be a channel for the divine. You can be an oracle. You can say, this is how I serve the divine on this planet, because we're all on this planet for a reason. And with priestesses, they're aware of that. They're aware of how they are serving in the temple. And I see my own body as a temple. So for me, I'm serving my body. I'm serving my divine soul. I'm serving my other council of elders that's sitting in the heavens. I'm serving all of the ancestors that have led up to this point, that have led to the temple that is this body, as well as the temple that is my home. And like there's layers upon layers upon layers of how I can step into the path of being a priestess. And I am in a place now where I think everyone has the potential, but it's a choice. And so it's not that I am a high priestess and I'm above anyone. It's not hierarchical. It's just an intentional way of living.
Well, in a bit, I would love if you would share like a few of the rituals that you teach your clients or that you use in your day-to-day. But first, can you tell us a little bit more about your transition into motherhood and how much of all of the way that you look at the world shifted in that transition? Or were you already like well steeped in all of this spirituality?
I think I thought I was. I think I understood myself as totally in the woo, and just living in a life that was very removed from the mainstream already at that point. So I did choose to have my children in a very natural, quiet setting. The first one was at a birth center. The second one was at home. I did want to breastfeed and co-sleep and attachment parent and wear the baby rather than put the baby in a stroller. Sometimes I had strollers when it was the two of them because that was just
Too much.
easier. But for the most part, I was wearing at least one child at all times because I love to have them close to me. But there was a lot of intentional choices that were made stepping into motherhood from a spiritual perspective, from a holistic wellness perspective, especially the breastfeeding and co-sleeping. I think those are wildly important things.
Right.
And the next level of spiritual journey opened up at that point because in our culture, I would say stepping out of maiden and into mother is not supported. It is not glorified. It is not kind of put on the pedestal the way that a maiden is. And being in that raw, vulnerable postpartum state is a really wonderful excavation into one's own psyche, into the dark recesses of the unconscious, into a woman's ability to call out to her sisters and actually lean in and find support rather than pull away or try to pull it together, because that's not the point. The point is to be in that open space at that time. And I was really blessed that I had cultivated that circle for myself when I was pregnant, and so I had it to fall back on. And I had wonderful family members, wonderful birth caregivers with my midwives and doulas, and so I was in a very nourished space, a nourished postpartum space, and found the transition to be magnificent and healthy and exciting as much as it was depressing and cry inducing and wailing. And I think the unification of those two was a new type of spiritual pathway. And by the time that I finished nursing, the motherhood had definitely shaped the way that I interacted with a lot of other people when it came to offering myself and creating healthy standards and boundaries. And, oh, I no longer will be doing this because I recognize my energy is being directed in this way. Or, no, you are not allowed to come any closer right now because my body needs a little bit of space. Or I only want to be touching this one human. And so I'm not going to try to interact with everyone in the world. I'm going to respect that. So there was a lot of first drawing of boundaries so I could learn how to respect my own energy, and then just a up leveling of standards. So the boundaries didn't have to be there because people understood, no, she's going to say no to this.
Yeah. Oh, that all sounds so beautiful. My initial reaction is a little bit of jealousy because I had some of that awareness, at least, but in the circumstances in which I gave birth to our two sons wasn't entirely possible, partly for compromising. My husband's a surgeon. And so I was like, within his viewpoint, he was compromising a lot too. So it was like this shared experience. And yeah, and cross-culturally, like there's just so many things that are going on there. And that when you said pulling it all together, that really, I remember with my second child, I was like hosting a house full of people 4 days after giving birth. And it's just like a completely different cultural perspective here where.
Where's here for you?
I'm Canadian, but I live in Mexico. And so in Mexico, I think it's shifting a little bit, but traditionally, like you can just like show up anytime after the baby's born at someone's house and expect to be served cake and coffee. And, you do bring a gift, and generally, unless you're very close family, you're not going to be staying the whole day or anything, but there's this sort of like open door thing that, to your point, on the one hand, I think my sort of Canadian roots would be too far the other extreme of like almost isolating yourself and being like, I don't know. And then interestingly, they also have in Mexican culture this very strong, like the baby doesn't leave the house for 40 days. And I remember my husband and I were like in the local town up in the mountains that you go for like really amazing fresh coffee. And, we were like out and about by day 20. For me, it was like hard to imagine. Seems funny post-pandemic staying in the house for 40 days straight, because now I've been doing it for much longer than that. But yeah, anyway, hindsight.
My family, it's like directly my family. My cousin gave birth, and she's the same age as me, right around the same month to her first. She had twins and I had one child. She had them in the hospital. Within like an hour of giving birth, my entire family was present in the hospital room, like around her bed. And there were a solid 25 cousins, uncles, aunts, grandma, just like everybody. She didn't get to hold the baby because the baby was being passed around from person to person to person. And my mom was horrified as they were like all kissing the baby. And she's like, it's a newborn, please don't spread the germs. And like, 5 years ago, that to me was just like the no. And I had my in-laws and my parents staying at an Airbnb across the way. So I had the support of direct family members, but I also had I need some alone time right now space. And I also had friends who were like, I'm going to bring you some broth, or I'm going to bring you guys all dinner. And I really didn't want to go out. I didn't feel comfortable with it. The first baby made me realize how uncomfortable I was a week later at the idea of like walking around outside. So with the second child, I did a lot more of the first 40 days nesting type of energy, and I did it gently. It wasn't like strict. We still went to the chiropractor, we still did a couple other things, but it was much more intentional. And I was so grateful that I live in a different state than the rest of my Mexican family, who would have been present had I given birth close enough for them to drive over and have some coffee.
Yeah, well, it's this, I admire, because I had the energetic wisdom of what I needed, but I didn't have the language or the strength or the confidence really to make that known in a functional way. Instead, I just felt like I was being selfish for not fitting in or whatever. But yeah, hindsight. So let's talk more about life as ceremony, because obviously that postpartum, all those aspects of bringing life into this world can be hugely ceremonial, but let's focus more on the day-to-day of the average woman. Like, what can we do to make our life more like ceremony without sort of bringing a layer of stress because it's going to take a bunch of time? Or is this something that you should incorporate, weekly or monthly? I'm guessing you have very strong ceremonies around full moon rituals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm more of a new moon gal. I joke that I was like, so there's some fun old English words that a lot of Wiccans will use, and I am not Wiccan. I'm more what would be called a hermetic witch, but the practice is still the same, where you go clockwise or counterclockwise, and it's called Jeshel or Widdershins. And all of my friends in my first coven were like, "You're a Widdershins witch." I would just like always be doing the other thing. Everyone's ready for full moon, and I was like, "No, I want the dark of the moon," and I bleed during the full moon rather than ovulate. It's really interesting. It's like there's
Can you break down those witch terms for us? The two that you just, well, first it was like Wiccan. What does that mean?
So Wiccan was actually a I would say codified or put down into a book in the 1930s and 40s. That's when it was really solidified as a practice and as a tradition. So in witchcraft, we say traditions, like which tradition are you a part of? In Christianity, they would say, what denomination? It's the same thing. Like, oh, what are you, Methodist or Presbyterian? And they're like, oh, eclectic. So I was like, oh, this is what happens when Western culture creates religion. We have these little factions that spiral out, and everybody likes their service to start on Sunday at 10 a.m. with this type of singing versus that group. And witches are the same. There's no difference. And I like joke about it. I'm like, oh, but even if you're doing Santeria, it's not going to be that different than if you're doing this type of work or that type of work, or if you're working with the Orishas. So for me, Wiccan was the first access point I had, because that was just the most widely published when I was a child. When I was about 10 and 11, I was doing a lot of reading on it. When I was 12, I told my parents, I'm a witch. I'm going to be a Wiccan. And they were like, quick, call the pastor. Everyone on her. And I was like, you don't have to, my soul's fine. Okay. Fine. And I've been baptized twice, because apparently the first time didn't stick. And I enjoyed reading about Wiccan practices for quite a while after that, but realized it still didn't sit quite right with me. And I started looking at other types of witchcraft. And the one thing that is pretty consistent between most of them is honoring the wheel of the year, which is the solstitial, equinoctial, and cross-quarter holidays. So if somebody was to look at the calendar, the next upcoming one is being really widely celebrated around the world with a bunch of different names. And in Mexico, it's Dia de los Muertos. In America, it's Halloween. In other places, it's other things. In Celtic language, it's Samhain, and it all falls on the same day. It starts on Halloween night when sunset, and then November 1st is like the day the spirits are here, and then November 2nd is when it starts to wind down. And for anybody who's like been in San Francisco during that weekend, it's so intense, all the holidays just like conglomerating. But we feel it, we feel that there's something happening this time of year. The veil is very thin, and we have access to energy that we may have to work a little bit harder to access at other times of years. And that wheel is this consistent model of change and life, being born, growing, and dying, and then going through death and coming out again. And that like model is what's happening right now, where this would be the dying phase, like going into death. And then the next holiday is Yule, and that would be the winter solstice, the light being reborn, the beginning of moving towards the light and the shift and the change, and then it grows. And so this wheel goes in a clockwise direction because it's based off of people who existed in the northern hemisphere. So if you live in the southern hemisphere, it's actually all in reverse, because the sun looks like it passes in a different space during the summertime, so everything goes counterclockwise. But in the northern hemisphere, for everybody who's pagan up here, Jeshel is an old word that means sunwise. So we're following a path geometrically and physically that mimics the action of the sun moving around in the sky from what is observable. And we know now, yeah, the sun doesn't move, we do, but we still go in that direction because it's recognized as the natural order, the primary motion of things. So Jeshul would go from east to south to west to north because the sun rises in the east. It looks like it moves more south as it reaches its apex, and then it sets in the west, and then north is dark. So the assumption of a lot of people in ancient times was that it passed through the night in the north, and that the sun was going through the underworld, and the Egyptians had a fun story about it, and the Celts had a fun story about it, but the sun had to be nurtured during the night in order to be reborn in the east. And so we move in that direction when we cast circles, when we are sometimes even moving our bodies, when we are calling in the directions. It's that clockwise pattern. And I'll even have people do this in yoga. And brought it back. Buti yoga, B-U-T.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word for something that's been kept hidden or secret. So when the person was coming up with the practice, Busy, who's a friend of mine, she wanted to bring back this hidden gem of movement and tribal release. So that clockwise motion is something we actually did with our torsos, where we'd spiral the body. And I always have people spiral counterclockwise first, because that sends things away. So when you're doing magical workings, whether you're Wiccan or not, if you're in witchcraft, if you're doing manifestations, if you move counterclockwise, that spiralic action sends things out from you. So if you want to send something out into the world, move counterclockwise. If you want to send something away from you because the energy's not serving, move counterclockwise. Like there's this action of like, I'm releasing, I'm letting go when we go counterclockwise.
Well, I love that you brought that up. Do you know what's Axis Syllabus? It's this, what's even the best word? It's like a practice. It's a type of dance, sort of. It's basically, it could birth out of Ray Frost is the founder, and he saw that dancers, like life professional dancers, like many yogis, if they're not taking care of themselves, their bodies would essentially start to break down after several decades of dancing. And so his practice has a lot to do with undulations, oscillating, and really like bringing people back to the floor and figuring out how, the functional movement, like, okay, imagine you can't crawl yet. Like you're a baby. What can you do? Like, what does it look like rolling over? Or like, what does it look like trying to get up to crawling? You don't know how to walk. All those like really deep functional floor-based movements. And then, there's a lot of like rolling and spinning and that like type of movement. So did you say that your friend founded Buti Yoga? Or I misunderstood that?
Yeah, I didn't meet her until well after the practice had taken off. My husband, who's also a yoga teacher, knew her from the yoga community like years before I met him. And when I met him, I was just getting into an Ashtanga practice, so a much more traditional, long-standing type of yoga practice with a specific sequence of postures, and you hold them for a specific amount of time, do a lot of vinyasas and chaturangas in between, and it's very rigid, very masculine. It was designed for adolescent males and not for females.
I trained in Ashtanga. I have long since.
So for me it was like, okay, so this is good, but something's missing. My female body wants something else. And Busy had a gorgeous experience of downloading a lot of the information because her body needed healing from trauma after the birth of her first child. And so this came out of a woman birthing. This came out of a woman's body. It came out of this wonderful cyclic, spiralic energy. And it brought essentially trauma release therapy of shaking into it. And she had a dance background already, so there was a lot of tribal dance movement. And I know that word is a little bit on edge for some people, but it was very intentionally done, where she worked with people who were Native American, who were Pacific Islander because she lived in Hawaii. She worked with people who had African heritage. So it wasn't that she was appropriating a bunch of different types of dance, which some dancers do, but she was honoring the cultures from where they came from, and then she was incorporating them into a really cohesive and wonderful practice that involves a lot of movement. So you might be in malasana, but instead of just holding still with prayer hands, you're drumming on the floor in malasana, and then you're moving your body open and going side to side, and it feels so freeing, and it's wonderful. And
Intuitively, I've been doing a lot of that in my practice over the last decade. So do you teach online? I want to take a class.
There's a couple tones that they have, like they call them tones, the videos of the company from Buti Yoga that I've recorded. I don't teach that particular style as much anymore because I wanted something that was a balance between Buti, which is all movement and very intuitive, but they didn't want you to plan the class ahead of time, which bothers my Virgo nature to no end. No, you don't understand. We're working towards more difficult postures. We can't just start with those postures. Nobody can do Ashtanga, and I was very upset about it was too freeing. And then I also didn't want Ashtanga. That's silent. It's just your breath. I'm like, no, I like the bumping music. That helps me get into this different space. And so, really wanted to find the balance between the two, and I just so happened to be married to a person who did that. And so Primal Flow is more what I teach, and I'll do special classes, or maybe like a corporate company wants me to do a wellness class and they'll bring me in. And there's a astrology school that does, for their third level of training, they have yoga over the weekend, and so I do that every month. But I haven't taught publicly in a long time on a regular basis because of the kids. And I think once they're in a space where they just don't need me to be as present on the day-to-day, then I'll go back to daily classes. But for now, it's kind of like when it's ready. But I love Primal Flow because it takes the trauma release shaking, where you shake the pelvis and you shake the abdomen and you do these motions to get things up and out, with the grounding postures that come from Ashtanga, and then the movement that is freeing that comes from Buti, and it's all woven together in a very, I think, grounding yet uplifting practice.
Beautiful. It sounds just so restorative to me. Sign me up. So tell us more about how you work privately with people. You mentioned that you do corporate once in a while, which is amazing, but how can people work with you, and what is your like current passion thing to work with?
I am right this very second doing a tarot intensive, so helping people walk through the journey of the cards, because they do tell a story in and of themselves, but how to make it not just a divinatory practice where you're telling people about the future, but a meditation practice where you're excavating your own dark recesses of your soul. And
I love how you like lightly just throw that in at the end.
Because that's what it is. Tarot's all archetypes. It's very Jungian for something that was invented in the Renaissance. It's a beautiful spiritual practice. And I think we were talking about life as ceremony earlier, that tarot is something that can be incorporated daily that doesn't have to take a lot of time once you start stepping into it. At the beginning, you like shuffle, say, show me what today brings, pull a card, and then read in the book about it. You don't have to have it memorized for it to still be impactful, for it to still resonate. And you can do that with oracle cards too if tarot scares you. because that means there's something in there that you're supposed to find out.
Can you quickly break down what's the difference between tarot and oracle cards?
Yeah, so tarot it's solidified. There's always 78 cards. The 22 major arcana always have a specific meaning, and the 4 minor arcana suits always have a specific meaning, and no matter who draws the pictures or whether it's cats or knights in shining armor that are on them, the names of the cards, the magician will always be the magician, the hermit will always be the hermit. It doesn't change. And so you can have this general understanding and pick up any deck, and if the image resonates for you, perfect. Oracle cards, on the other hand, are individually developed decks that can have any number from 20 to 200, and the author has put intention and meaning behind each card, but it's not universal. You can't see like the mother in one oracle deck and have it be the same as Gaia in another one. They're only contained within themselves. And so you could get to know it really wonderfully, but you wouldn't be able to pick up another oracle deck and understand it as the same thing. Whereas a tarot deck, you can. And
so could we say tarot is to witches as Wiccan? No, it's like more solidified, written down, universal?
Not necessarily, because Wicca isn't the only one that's
There's multiple traditions.
Yeah, there's a lot of traditions. Tarot is more like everybody knows that if you're going to cook with salt, it's going to do this thing. Whereas if you have other spices, they add good flavors, but it's not going to be the same.
Well, we'll be sharing in the show notes all the ways that people can connect with you, but just quickly, like, what's your preferred way to connect with people?
I say if you want to do one-on-one work, go to my website and read about it, because it says who it is for and it says who it is not for. And that's more important than reaching out to me and saying, do you think I should work with you? Because it immediately sets some very clear lines of forward motion. Like, I'm not going to be okay with people who are abusing substances, because I can't help you on your wellness path if you're going to continue to do that. I'm not going to be okay with people who are kind of just looking for the what's the word, almost like the novelty of witchcraft rather than the deep spiritual transformational practice that it is.
Back to the trendy witch. I'm seriously considering titling this episode something along those lines, because I think it is very trendy. But yeah, I love that you have such clear boundaries on your website. That I think speaks volumes to your authenticity and sovereignty and everything that you're doing. Is there one last thing that you want to leave us with?
A consistent theme around the world of light, right? Bringing the light back in, whether you're seeing it as the Christ child being reborn, as Horus being born out of Isis, as the green man being born out of the goddess. This theme of the light being reborn is the biggest one. So whether you light a candle and you just kind of contemplate bringing the light back in, or you want to do a fuller ritual, which for us would be turning out all the lights and having one candle stay lit, and then maybe lighting candles around the house and saying, like, I'm bringing the light back to the world. It can be super simple. It doesn't have to be super fancy. And we already do so many rituals for Yule. We bring evergreens into our homes. We bring family into our homes, and we feel the warmth of that. We contemplate the darkness of the year and the coldness of the year, and how there's still joy and light at the core of it. There's this understanding it's a magical season. So as we're in this like deep darkness, we're gestating. What are we going to be birthing? And a lot of people do it on New Year's Day rather than on solstice, but with that rebirthing of the light, that one candle that lights the others, we talk about our intentions. And a fun thing to do if you have fire safe space in your house is write something on one side of the bay leaf like those little bay leaves you dry and put in soup. Right on one side what you're letting go, and on the other side what you're bringing in, and then you burn it and you let the smoke take those intentions up and out with the candles and with the light, and say like, okay, I'm starting anew. A lot of people see this time as like the new year moving in. For witches, it's Samhain, because it's like the darkness signals, and here we go, because that's the beginning of the conception and the process of being pregnant, and then the birth happens at the solstice. So that's like the new year being born. So honoring it as quiet time, and maybe you do like a minute of silence with your family, and you can get kids, it's like a game. You're like, okay, we're gonna light the candle, stare at the candle, don't talk, shh, the fairy's gonna get you. And just like be quiet with them and let them sit in that space of stillness, and we ask the kids, and my friends ask their kids, of what do you want for the year? And they're always like, polar bears, trains, and they say weird things, but it's still like the beginnings and planting those seeds with them. Whereas for the adults, we can contemplate, okay, this is the dark time. What do I do in my darkest hour? Do I close off? Do I isolate? Or do I turn to my community? Do I look for the light? Where's the light? It's actually inside me. Okay, cool. And moving through that exercise is a fun way to celebrate. We'll roll beeswax candles. We'll have certain essential oils misting, and it feels very festive. But I think that's a good practice of intentionally lighting a candle, having a moment of silence, and then thinking about the intentions of the year forward. As the light grows, what do you want to grow with it?
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Amy. I feel like we could probably talk for several hours, but let's leave it there for today. And I really appreciate all of your wisdom. I'm pretty drawn to learn so much more from you. I'm sure we're going to work together in the future. Anything else you wanted to say before we part, please, for today?
That's it for today. I feel pretty complete. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Energetically You. I hope that this episode has helped you to tune into your natural energy sources so that you feel more energized and focused throughout your day. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a second to rate and review. Each review helps us to help more ambitious women just like you accomplish their goals. Don't forget to take a screenshot, share it on social or in your Instagram stories, and tag me at Megan Swan Wellness. See you soon.